In 1960, hello, and welcome to 1969 by Hank Bernschultz, Jada Malloy, Kendall McGlynn, and Elise Perry. The first section of importance is politics. In 1969, Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the United States, won against Herbert Humphrey, the Democratic candidate, with 32 states to their 13. Additionally, George Wallace won 5 states as a third-party candidate because third-party candidates existed in 1969. An additional important political event was the Stonewall riots. They occurred because of demonstrations and against a police raid at Stonewall Inn on June 28, 1969, against the LGBT community there. This is an important event because it's the lead up to the gay liberation movement and subsequent establishment of civil rights, etc.
Okay. On November 15, 1969, a massive moratorium march in Washington, D.C. was held to protest the Vietnam War. This attracted over 500,000 demonstrators against the war, including many performers and activists. This massive Saturday march and rally preceded the March Against Death, which began on Thursday evening and continued throughout that night and all next day. Next. And now on to entertainment. In 1969, the Beatles held their last performance ever done in January, and following this, Woodstock was held, seen as the 3 days of peace and music. Woodstock was a festival that attracted many, many people to come for entertainment and joy in a time of hardships with the Vietnam War and protest.
Super important in this year as the third Super Bowl, which was with the New York Jets versus the Baltimore Colts. In 1969, it was the first game to bear the Super Bowl name, and is also regarded as the greatest upset in recorded history of sports and football, as well as an 18-point underdog. The New York Jets beat the Colts 16-7, and as well, the Major League Baseball had a 100-year anniversary with the New York Mets winning against the Baltimore. Another key part is television, and so in 1969, Sesame Street first aired on NET, which later became CBS on November 10th, and Star Trek also aired its final episode on June 3rd before being canceled. And then some popular shows are Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, which is seen up top, then Gunsmoke and Bonanza, both of which are Western shows. And then on television, an important event was the live transmission of the moon landing, which was viewed by 720 million people worldwide, which will be explained right now.
Technological advancements. So, the Boeing 747 was created it flew in 1969. So, such a creation of the Boeing 747 was such a technical and financial challenge that Boeing basically bet its entire company on this single project. The creation of the Boeing 747 led to more fuel-efficient turbofan engines. However, engine issues, and the engineers were arguing about whether or not they should put engines on the plane for the press. And 24 hours before the Boeing was debuted to the press, they had to quickly mount the engines onto the plane, and it was very flimsy looking, but they got away with it. And eventually the engines were fixed so that they actually worked, and they had their first flight on February 9, 1969. However, there were still some major issues with the engines. For example, the engines would explode when they were throttled up too fast. In order to fix this problem, the test pilots, they took up the CEO and basically flew him around for a while, trying to convince him that the engines needed fixing. And to make their point, they blew up 2 of the engines while everyone was still on the plane. They were going to blow up the third, but the CEO was like, no, we'll fix this problem. But more interestingly, there was the moon landing. So Apollo 11 was manned by 3 men, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, only 2 of which would actually land on the moon. So you have the first stage, second stage, and the third stage. However, problems began after the separation from the command module. So here are some of the issues that were happening with the lunar module. So when Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong were coming onto the moon, there was a landing computer error 1202. Basically, it was the computer telling them that it was taking in way too much information and it just couldn't handle it, or if it continued for much longer, the computer was going to reboot. So that was an issue, but they continued on with the mission anyways. And then Armstrong and Aldrin also overshot the predicted landing zone, which was a problem, but they fixed it. And they almost ran out of fuel before landing the lunar module. They actually had to drop a couple feet when the fuel cut off. And lastly, they couldn't open the door of the lunar module. They almost weren't able to walk on the moon, which gave us the historic line. Next slide, please. That's one step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Thank you. And here's a cool picture of Ice Cream Sesame Street characters. You got Snuffleupagus, Cookie Monster, Big Bird, Elmo, and Oscar the Grouch. Thank you and have a good day.
Woo!